Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Daraja. This is Omar bringing you the Stairway to Your Higher Self podcast. Daraja is an Arabic word that means levels, stages, steps, or degrees. In each episode, we'll bring you stories of Muslim leaders from around the world who have overcome significant challenges through discipline, positivity, and faith. Our goal is that you'll be inspired through their stories to reach your higher self. Welcome to Daraja. Today, we have the privilege and honor of speaking to Amany Killawi, the co founder of LaunchGood. Just for the uninitiated, Amany, would you mind telling us about yourself, how you got started with LaunchGood?
Excited to be here. Alhamdulillah, my name is Amany Killawi, co-founder and chief operating officer of LaunchGood.com, the world's largest crowdfunding platform focused uniquely for and by Muslims. Alhamdulillah, to date, we've helped raise over $500 million for amazing causes worldwide. We actually celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year.
Truly amazing. 10 years and $500 million raised. That's a billion with a B. MashaAllah. So what is the origin of LaunchGood? What's LaunchGood's origin story?
Yeah, subhanAllah, I didn't wake up and say, I want to be a social entrepreneur. It wasn't necessarily something that I had top of mind. I'm the middle of seven. My parents are Syrian immigrants, born and raised in Detroit. And I actually went to school for social work. That was my background. I knew I wanted to make a difference. And I actually saw a lot of prophetic principles in social work. And I said, you know what, this is amazing. I have a unique opportunity as an American Muslim to make a difference that my cousins overseas don't. And so I actually used to organize a lot as a youth organizer. And through organizing, I discovered crowdfunding. And that's how I actually met my co-founder, Chris. We weren't co-founders at the time, but there were very few Muslims in this space 10 years ago. Chris was one of the first Muslims on Kickstarter. I believe our group was one of the first Muslims on Indiegogo. And we had asked Chris for support on crowdfunding and our strategy. And a few years later, Chris reached out and had told me about this concept called LaunchGood. Back then, it was just a Weebly website. We didn't have anything. We hadn't built anything. But I think collectively, we started to realize that we have 1.8 billion Muslims. There was over 400 niche crowdfunding websites at the time, but nothing unique to the Muslim community. And sometimes a lot of projects just need a little bit of funding. And so the idea really was incepted then. Why don't we build a platform that helps us tell our stories? Because we were so tired of playing the defensive narrative. Not only tell our stories, but actually practically help us raise funds for ideas. And that's really how it got started. I can get more into the challenge of getting funding and how that all unfolded. But we really started with the question of why. Why not?
MashaAllah. And LaunchGood has three co-founders, Chris, Amany, and Omar. What's Omar's journey to LaunchGood?
I think he was actually I can't remember if he's number 2 or number 3. We had old sweatshirts with number 2 person on the team. Omar originally was brought on to help design the website. And he still kept working on it after his contract ended. And he did his work with such ihsan that I remember, I'm going back 10 years. Chris and I were well, let's invite Umar as a third co-founder. His spirit of how he envisions the product was so beautiful that we felt it was really critical. And that helped. I think starting a company is a very lonely road, and to have 2 co-founders instead of just one, I think has been a huge aspect of our success. It can also get challenging, but alhamdulillah, in our case, it worked out. Ironically, a lot of people think Chris and I are married. It's funny. And it doesn't help that Chris's wife, his name is also Amany, and she's Arab, and she's also relatively my height. So it doesn't, it leads to more confusion. But I actually think there's a larger issue there, which is people haven't seen mixed founders in the Muslim community, male and female. And so they always are you guys a power couple? And we're no. I thought getting married would help clear that out. Unfortunately, it didn't. I changed my Facebook profile picture. But to me, there's this larger question of like, we've got to make sure we have more Muslim females in tech, in business, and it's possible, and it can be done, and it can be done with ihsan. And there's so much that is available to us now to make sure that that kind of like work ethic and development and support for female entrepreneurs is there.
100%. I think having Muslim hijabi women at the helm of large organizations is a powerful testament and an example for aspiring Muslim entrepreneurs. Absolutely. So, 10 years in, 500 million raised. What's next for LaunchGood?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're asking ourselves that same question now. And the goal of LaunchGood from the start was to uplift the Ummah through connecting us all digitally. Right now, that looks like crowdfunding, but that expression and that manifestation of that mission can take so many different ways, whether it's a social media app, whether it's a payments company, whether it's a super app, where you can have all of your services in one place, whether it's financial to like a Muslim marketplace. I think we're at the cusp of answering that question. Like, what's beyond crowdfunding? If we want to connect nearly 2 billion Muslims digitally and uplift the Ummah, can we do that beyond crowdfunding? I think crowdfunding is just the tip of the iceberg. And so one of the things that I'm leading now with labs is trying to figure out what are the different platforms that we can essentially explore that with. We're toying around with a couple of ideas. And I think there's also, it's fun to also go back to the early startup days,
Right.
because effectively this is another startup and it's kind of a different mindset than say what you would do at 10 years.
Most people may say you are just a Muslim version of GoFundMe, but obviously your vision is far more expansive in terms of scope, size, and impact. What does that scope look like when you think about empowering the ummah?
Yeah, to your point about this is just a Muslim version of this, I just want to talk a little bit about that. Because I think what we're realizing now, especially in light of the recent events in Palestine, it's so important for us to have our own platforms time and time again, that meet our unique needs. Like, you're not necessarily going to find a Ramadan challenge, 30 days of giving on a website like GoFundMe or Just Giving, right? The ability to have that buffet of causes that are curated just to our needs and our interests as a community is so important. And then it builds that circular economy, right? Where the dollars are being recirculated within the Muslim community. So that's one key point about that. But I also believe it's not enough to just build a Muslim version of something. You truly have to build a better product. A lot of people just kind of throw the word Muslim on it, or it's halal, this or that, and then expect you to just support because they're Muslim. And I've always challenged our team, you've got to think beyond that. We can't just be a Muslim version. We have to, you do have a higher success rate right now on LaunchGood than you do on GoFundMe because of the one-on-one support that the team provides and the marketing packages and the support in terms of that visibility to the Muslim community. So it's important for anybody in that space to remember that it's not just about having the copycat. It's about truly building a better product that's unique to our needs and owning our own payment rails, owning our own platforms. I think you recently attended GMW, the Global Muslim Workation, which is a way to really bring Muslims worldwide, change makers, social entrepreneurs to start exploring conversations like this, like owning our own platforms, like being able to build tech for Palestine. And that's really, I think, just the start of something really special. We're trying to figure out what's next. How do we take something like Global Muslim Workation, which is hard to explain if you're not there, and scale that?
Global Muslim Workation was hands down for me one of the most inspirational conferences I have attended over the last 15 years. For me, GMW embodied the concept of daraja, a sense of togetherness, positivity, and so much powerful, amazing energy.
Yeah, it's
So,
wild. And I think also I think so many people now are just craving that community. You can see it, you can feel it. To be able to like facilitate that is like is a huge honor.
So we're recording during the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and Muslims are being shadow banned for speaking out. What is it like for Launch Good at the moment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I came back from maternity leave recently, and it's been like one of the most eventful months, I would say, in the last few years, given the situation in Palestine. Alhamdulillah, we've helped facilitate over 18 million in aid for Palestine. And even by the time you post this recording, that number is going to be much higher. And of course, that puts us in the crosshairs of a lot of groups. We've faced cyber attacks that we've been able to trace back the IP addresses to Tel Aviv and India. And one of those attacks actually put the website down for a considerable amount of time. And getting subhanAllah, like the Muslim community is amazing. As soon as we just put word out that people were like, "Hey, we can help you. You're one of them, really, in terms of, hey, let's help you figure out how to be even more proactive around these denial of service attacks," which essentially they just cloud the website so that donations can't happen. That's effectively the aim. Is it like it's like a virtual traffic jam is one way I would describe it. And so we faced attacks like that. We've had more than one denial of service attack. Alhamdulillah, like we've beefed up our defenses there. We're starting to see a lot of pressure from our processors. What's your process around campaigns? We have a good relationship with all of them. So we've been able to say, hey, this is our due diligence package, this is what we've done. These charities are all regulated. They're in good standing in the US and the UK. They're not sanctioned, etc. But what's more interesting to me is just a lot of the Zionist groups that have come after LaunchGood's. So we've had folks write smear articles that unfortunately are extremely biased. And it's frustrating because like any Joe Schmo can just write something, and then you've got to effectively figure out how to manage the PR around that. So we're seeing cases like that. There's Israeli lawyers for, I think it's called UK is Lawyers for Israel, have also shared their concerns and sent letters. People are threatening to report us to OFAC. So you're seeing this considerable amount of like being now in the crosshairs of the geopolitical situation.
Yeah.
And for us, we've been pretty staunch about saying, look, we're going to support Palestine. We're going to support safely. We're going to be smart about it, but we're not going to back down, because if we as a community don't support the Palestinian cause and humanitarian aid specifically for Palestinians, then who's going to be there for us when we need support as a platform or we need support individually? So it's been tough for a lot of folks. They just would rather step away and not deal with this and completely like remove themselves. But alhamdulillah, like we've been pretty clear about where we stand.
So you're seeing threats in your supply chain and third-party relationships. Have you lost any business due to these threats?
No, alhamdulillah, we haven't. I mean, our process has always been to be transparent and proactive. So being able to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is why we think these claims are not credible. This is the due diligence we've done on these charities. This is, the process we have, whether it's ongoing monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been extremely helpful for us. But that hasn't always been the case with payment partners. Banking while Muslim is a real issue. And it's probably one of the number one thing that we've faced difficulty over the last 10 years, as well as, unfortunately, anybody who wants to build in the Muslim space. Like, it's a real challenge. And when I say banking while Muslim, it's just the general de-risking. And again, keep me honest with these terms, because I know I'm throwing a lot of compliance lingo, but de-risking means when you essentially, you have a portfolio of companies and you're like, these are all risky, let's get rid of them. And so Muslim companies and organizations tend to face that a lot more than non-Muslim companies. And this isn't my words, this is studies from the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding and others that show this bias. And if I remember correctly, and I've got to go back, I believe it was like 60% of Muslim businesses and nonprofits are more likely to be de-risked than non-Muslim companies or nonprofits. And you can imagine how challenging that is if you're trying to build something, because the biggest problem is often, sometimes there isn't actually a real issue, but there's this issue of perceived risk. Like, what if there's this? What if you donate? What if it's connected to this organization? And a lot of what ifs, but you can't really pull to anything tangible. But when we have conversations directly with providers, it's been awesome, because they're actually pretty impressed with what we do and how we go above and beyond. I think that's the key. I think this is just another note, but I feel like we need so many more compliance analysts that are Muslim, because a lot of folks that are making these decisions may have never met a Muslim before.
Yeah.
And they're working off of sources online that are extremely biased. But there should just be a whole nother effort to train more compliance professionals in the space.
I think it's fair to say Muslims are being targeted by financial institutions. Anecdotally, I mean, I have spoken to a number of Muslims. I've read stories where bank accounts have been closed without explanation. The process of closing accounts is also not a very transparent process.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's not just Muslims. Like, we're seeing this where you've got to build compliance for all that's inclusive. I mean, Citibank recently, I'm not sure if you're following, recently was revealed that they targeted Armenians and didn't, like, explicitly said, if certain customers have this last name, do not give them a credit card. And then they I believe had to pay like over $1 million to anybody who was rejected. So you're seeing this time and time again. The challenge is actually proving the discrimination. We've thought about class action lawsuits. We've thought about different strategies, but ultimately, I believe the best strategy is to build collectively as a community to a point where you change the equation, right? Risk and opportunity. If we collectively bank together, we collectively process together, it's billions and billions of dollars. And that changes the equation for banks, because they're like, whoa, how can we miss out on the Muslim market? It's so huge. It's such a huge opportunity. Capitalism to me speaks most in terms of what some of these banks might do. And you see this with stories of just larger banks that are part of really shady stuff, but it's okay because they're able to justify the business opportunity. But ultimately, I think that's one way to go at it, other than, of course, having the best process in place and compliance.
Great insights. We need more active engagement from Muslims across the board. Any other insights you can share with us, especially for young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, the first one I would say is having the growth mindset. I mean, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, what's your KYC process? Do you have an angel? What's your burn rate? All of these terms that get used, that lingo, I didn't know any of this. Remember, I came from a social work background, right? But you grow into those roles because you care so much about what you're building. And that's like the number one thing I would say for anybody who's kind of on the looking to maybe become an entrepreneur, looking to start something and feels a bit out of their element, right? You will grow into that. You just have to give yourself space to have that growth mindset. And I love referencing, even the prophet, peace be upon him, when he became a prophet overnight. He had to become a political, social, and religious leader. And he had to grow into that role, right? So what about us? It's very hard. It's uncomfortable, but having that mindset of like, look, I don't know everything about this space, but I care so much, I'm going to figure it out. Sometimes when you're outside an industry, you bring an interesting insight. So that's one huge takeaway, I would say. There's another one I'll mention, but I see you smiling, so I'll stop there.
I was thinking about our beloved Prophet ﷺ and how he reacted when he transitioned into prophethood, right? You remember, he kept saying, Ma'ana biqari, I can't read. His journey is one of inspiration and instruction. I love this because it's what we strive to achieve.
Yeah. I would say another piece of that, at one point I had to make the decision to go full time, right? And we weren't financially sustainable at the time. Like, we had a growth trajectory, like it kept growing, but it didn't make sense financially. Like, and it was gonna take a while. I mean, most people don't know this, but it took us about 4 years before we took a salary. And LaunchGood's 10 years old, so you can imagine. We started in 2013. If I count 2013, it would be 5 years. But it took almost half of our journey before we could actually take a salary and then begin to build the team. Most people don't know that. So there is a risk there, right? Financially, etc. But I think for me, when I took the jump, I always tell people, you can aim, and if you never shoot, you just don't know. Like, a lot of times you kind of get stuck in the like, oh, what about this? What about that? That doesn't mean you shouldn't, have some savings, but ultimately for me, where the decision was key was istikhara. So praying istikhara to go full time, and I actually had prayed it over a year, because for me, it wasn't just financial. It was, okay, I'm about to put a lot of mental space and energy into this. I know if I'm in all the way, right? Like 150%. And so I know I want to build. I love my community. I just need confirmation. Where do I build? Do I plant seeds here? Is this where I should be? Is this where my calling should be in this stage and in this season of my life? And subhanAllah, prayed istikhara over a year. Eventually, I had peace. And I like to use the analogy of like a sandstorm in your heart. Like istikhara feels like a sandstorm. Like you're not sure, what decision do I do? What do I do? And then it settles. The sandstorm just settles. And for me, it felt like I'm holding a rope in the dark. I don't know where it's going, but I 100% can feel it. And I'm holding on to that rope and I want to pursue this path. And so istikhara is that second, that sort of big takeaway for me is any journey, any cusp, if you're on the cusp of any decision, make istikhara a practice. Some days in LaunchGood, I'm making istikhara like 5 times a day. I'm like, can I just like make one prayer and 5 du'as and try to like nail it in with all the decisions that you have to make? But that's so, so important.
So what was the first 6 years like? I mean, no marriage, no kids, a lot of steps, right? In terms of you progressing and growing as an organization. Were you living at home?
I was. I also live in Detroit. It's a lot easier. Like I don't live in San Fran. Right. So I had that unfair advantage. And I think a lot of people think you have to build a company out of San Francisco. We certainly had that opinion at first. Like we pitched to investors there. We thought that was the only way to do it. We were actually terrible at our own fundraising in the beginning. We raised $0. People weren't ready to take a bet on us, yet alone the Muslim community. But subhanAllah, we ended up bootstrapping it with $10,000. And that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. That's like the size of a crowdfunding campaign. We were able to pay that investor back, but we just hired a team overseas to build the first version of the website and then grew it from there. Everybody had a side hustle. I had another job. I had another part-time job. Chris had 2 part-time jobs, and Ahmed had his design firm. So we all kind of like had to make it work. But I will say living in Detroit did make it easier in terms of taking that leap of faith. You still needed to like support your family, especially as a female. When you come home, it's shift number 2. You're often also like taking care of your younger siblings, dropping them off, et cetera, et cetera. But there was that period during this 4 years where we had other things going on as well. And then slowly, one by one, we came in and went full time. Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah. I'm excited to hear your story, and I hope our listeners draw inspiration from your path.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was fun to go down memory lane.
MashaAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you success in this life and the next. Thank you for being on our episode of Daraja. And to you, our listeners, thank you always for tuning in. If you've liked what you heard, please go ahead and subscribe, tell your friends about us, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.